So there are like actually thousands of modules, right? I did talk about a blog page called Python Module of the Week, where someone has documented examples about various of these modules. Even it doesn't cover everything, right? So when you talk about like, what modules you want to learn, it is more or less like what is the purpose, right? But there are certain things that will be always useful as long as you are dealing with files. So there are modules that is always helpful, right? So one of the things that we are going to talk about today is the CSV module, right? CSV stands for comma separated values. It's a delimited file that that contains ASCII text, which is human readable. Okay, so typically when this files concept came into existence, probably in the 60s, the very first format is like a fixed format file. So that means like, you define some sort of copybook or a mapping that says, okay, my byte 1 to byte 10 is an ID, employee ID. Byte 11 to byte 40 is last name. Byte 41 to byte 70 is my first name, and so on, right? So it's a fixed format file. Each record will take exactly the same amount of bytes. So which is good, which is easy to read and easy to process because you can define a mapping. So it depends on whichever language. There are many names for it, right? Structure, copybook, and so on, right? So, but the disadvantage of that is, let's say I have allocated like 25 bytes for name, right? And then my name is John or Joseph or like, Preeti or Rishi. Then the remaining 15, 20 or whatever bytes is going to be there and it will occupy space, right? So then to overcome that or to save some space, they came up with this delimited or variable length file where each record will be of different length, but we will be splitting these files with a delimiter. So a comma, for example. A CSV file, even though its name stands for comma separated values, it is a default delimiter, right? Like you can have other delimiters that you might have heard about. There is a TSV file, tab separated values. There is a PSV file, pipe separated values, or you can have your own combination. So there are places where they use the @ and hash symbol, right? Especially if you have if you really want to make sure that that combination doesn't happen in the in your data itself, right? So it's easy to read, it's easy to change even for us, right? Like these days, like you can open the CSV in Excel and then you can make some changes and then copy it back. Okay, so that's what the CSV file is, right? And we are going to look into how do we process, and then also talk about why we need a CSV file, because we don't actually need the CSV module. We can do it ourselves. And then what is the drawback, advantages and drawback, right? So, and here is a disclaimer. Okay, so this is something we have encountered quite frequently as test bugs or production incidents. So in case you have CSV file that is created as an output, right? Do not open that in an Excel, or make a copy, keep the original, open the copy, because when you open a CSV file in Excel, it might drop leading zeros or it might convert the number format. So you open it, you save it, and then your original content might be lost. Okay, so this has led to a lot of bugs or like questions back and forth. Quite a lot of time in my tenure in the current project, which is more than 12 years, right? So CSV means like, keep the copy, right? It is easy for you to open in Excel and then view it and make sure that original stays there, so that like if your requirement says the fields has to have leading zeros, and then you will all of a sudden find in the Excel there is no leading zeros on certain numeric fields, and then you will be tempted to panic or create a defect or whatever it is, and then only to be told, or like only to be referred with the original value, hey, it is all there, just that Excel dropped it, right? So something that we have come across quite often, right? Which is no fault of anybody. It's just that even when you double click a CSV, your Windows automatically opens that in Excel, unfortunately, right? The CSV module. So the module for processing these special delimited files. Okay, it works better than traditional I/O. You can always open a CSV file using the open function, and then using the file handle, you can do an iteration and then read it, and then you can process. There are two functions called split and join. Okay, two methods: a string method that can split a string by comma, or join a list or any sequence by comma as well. Works very well, right? So then why we are having the CSV module? So like I said in the beginning, CSV or fixed format files are text files, very easy, human readable, and very easy to change and all those things, right? So anytimes you have a very user-friendly application or output, so that means there is a headache for somebody else. It's just that your headache has been passed on to somebody else. So anything that is easy to use would be difficult to maintain or create or develop in the first place. So what happens is the CSV file doesn't have any specification. This is how you have to create a CSV file, right? So all we know is the individual fields are comma separated, right? So it can have one header, it can have multiple headers, or the data itself might have comma in it, which is acceptable, right? Let's say you have a field called name. So somebody might be putting last name, comma, first name, which is a valid way of writing names. So what generally applications like Excel does is, when you save it as a CSV, it put a double quote around it. So that means Excel can actually parse, right? So your traditional I/O using split and join may not work unless otherwise you have a complicated parser written using regular expression or some other way where you can take care of this embedded comma in the field itself. Comma not as a separator, but comma as a data. So that is the main or the very compelling reason. As soon as you think about processing any delimited file, you think about CSV module, not your own stuff. I have an example in the same HTML file where I will show you the pitfall, right? So when we use the CSV module, all you need to do is import CSV. CSV is built in. So there are four major methods that we will, the two major methods and two classes, or whatever it means, like, this something that we will use, two for reading and two for writing. The very basic thing is reader and writer. So you open a file and pass the file handle to the reader module, reader method, right? So what that one does is it automatically reads a record, it parses the record and then convert that into field and then return a list. So doing all these things like embedded command, everything. So you will get a list. So you can iterate, and then after getting each and every row, like, you should be able to process individual fields that can be rearranging the field, computing, or whatever it is. Writer, on the other hand, takes a list and then it creates a string, comma separated, and then it, whether if the data itself, one of the individual element in the list contains comma or delimited that you are looking for, it automatically adds double quotes around it, and then you can write that into a record. So reader and writer are the basic level of parsing your CSV file. Dict reader or dict writer is a bit sophisticated, right? So instead of reading as a list, so let's say you gave the header field names, or you read from the file. So instead of creating each row as a list, you will create a dictionary, so that like it will be easy for you to process. Okay, it's just a variation. So every time you read, you will have a dictionary, fields will be there, and then it will be easy for you to refer. So if you want to make something dynamic, so dict reader and dict writer are the way to go. So let's see an example. So I have a file, employee ID, last name, first name, gender, department ID, and then email ID, right? So first thing is, again, every example that we are going to see, it is going to have a faker based test data generator. So that means like the code is all here. So you can always take it, put it in your local and run it. Okay. So I have this. So we have created a fake data creation. We just look at the demo for how to use a CSV writer module, right? So we have imported faker, and then I have a header that shows what are the fields. And so this is the thing I was talking about. So you can actually take a string and split it by ourselves, right? So we have a header list. So how we do is we open the file. You know the with, which is a context manager where it can have an internal try catch block. It can automatically close the file handle. So we open a file, right? And then we create a writer object, right? So what we say is call the csv.writer and then pass the file handle and then tell what is the delimiter. It is comma, and then quote character is double quote. So whenever I have some data that contains delimiter, I want to use double quote as a quote character around that field. And then quoting is minimal quoting. Like if you don't give minimal, there I think there is the quote all is also there. Like anytime there is a string data type, it automatically quotes everything, right? So we create a writer object, and then first time what we do is we call the write row method, and then we pass this header list, right? So it simply writes the header, and then I have like I'm just calling this 5 times. So employee ID, I simply reformat the counter, so it will have 1001, 10002 and all. So last name, so there is a method in the faker module called last name, and then gender, I'm using the choice method of the random module, and then get a random male or female, and based on the gender we are getting a first name. Again, department ID 10001 to 1005, so we are getting some random value, and then email ID we are constructing. We take the first name, first character, last name, we convert that into some title case format, and then append @abc.in. Actually, faker module has a email method, but again, it might give you a very random email where your first name and last name might be John Smith. So it will be giving something like David a@abc.in or gmail.com or something like that. So that's the reason. So this is a combination where we have used faker method, and then we have done random choices, and then we have done reformats. So so everything is incorporated, and then we call the write row method and then pass the value that you need to give as a sequence. Okay, so if you remember, every field has been given as given within a parenthesis again, and then passed into the write row method. So parenthesis delimited with a comma is called what? It's a tuple. So we can pass a list or we can pass a tuple. It's simply writes that into a record, right? And then we use the print method just to print it on the screen. Okay, so this has nothing to do with the printing. I just wanted to show what is being printed. So we have created 5 records. Okay, so the thing we want to take care of here is importing the CSV module, creating a writer object, and then calling the writer row using a sequence. So typically a list or a tuple, right? Very easy, right? So here is where we are reading it. So here is a read and write. So what we are going to do here is we are going to read a CSV file and then convert that into a PSV file, right? Comma separated file into a pipe delimited file. So we have employee.csv, which we created earlier. And we are opening the file for reading. So here we are doing a reader object. Reader and writer are pretty much the same, right? So we have a delim and then code character and everything. So here, reader, we pass the file handle as a first parameter and then delimiter. You can read into help csv.reader and see like what other features are available. So anytime you create an object, right? So there is a type of object called iterable, right? Or iterator. So what that means is whenever you create that object, so it can produce a list of values, but it won't actually give you that. So you either have to put it in a for loop or you have to call the next function explicitly, right? So here what we are doing is we create a reader object. Since we know that the first record is going to be header, I am simply calling it outside the for loop. Otherwise, what I need to do is I have to put a counter variable and then say if count equal to 1, then header equal to reader.read, something like that, right? So otherwise, else you do the processing. So I'm just avoiding one if condition check inside the loop. So we simply call the next and then it will just take away the first field, right? So now here is one thing, like whenever you call a next on an empty file, for example, let's say your CSV file is coming as empty, you don't want to just call this will create an exception. Okay, maybe you want to check whether your file is empty, not empty first, and then do the line that is highlighted. Okay, so this is one of the precautions you might have to take in order to avoid crashing your program while if the file passed is empty. Okay, opening the output file again. I'm just replacing the .csv with .psv, right? So it will create employee.psv file, which is a pipe separated values. So calling the writer, and then we first write the header. So okay, so this is a list, right? Now I created an output. All I did is I simply said my delimiter is pipe. So now whatever it writes, this list will be this was read as a comma separated values, but since the writer says my delimiter is pipe, it simply writes that with pipe separator. Okay, if you want to put tab, you can put that as well, right? And then for each row you read, you simply have to write. There is nothing, right? Like you read a CSV file, since it says delimiter is a comma, it creates a list by splitting by comma. You say write using the list. It knows the writer has a delimiter as pipe. It simply writes no extra coding. Set up the reader, set up the writer with appropriate delimiter file. Read from the reader, write using the writer. The conversion happens automatically. Okay. So if you look at this example, if you take it and then you make it as a parameterized code, say, a first parameter is the input file name, second parameter is output file name. And, if the first parameter ends with CSV, PSV or TSV, then you can take the extension of the second parameter, and then based on that, you can set input delimiter is this, output delimiter is this. So do a little bit of code in getting the file names as a parameter, right? And then this piece of code can create any file format, delimited file format to any delimited file format, right? So as long as you, based on the extension, if you can determine, or you can make the user pass 4 parameters: input file name, output file name, input delimiter, output delimiter. Okay, so this probably 10 or 15 line of code is something which is very powerful, which you can put, which you can do any delimited file conversion, right? So here is an example: my CSV file, my and CSV file, right? First 5 records. I mean, it just has only those. So I just displayed using the head command, which is a underlying operating system command, right? So the reader and writer methods. So if you want to read it as a dictionary, right? So we will say in advance what are my fields, right? So here what we are doing is, like, we have a big file, so we are only interested in certain fields alone, right? So I have a field, list of fields. I initially had 6 fields in my input file. I'm looking at department ID, employee ID, and then email ID, right? I am not even interested in the last name, first name. So we create the CSV file, and then we create a Dict reader object instead of just reader. So when you read it, what happens? You will get a dictionary, and then we saw list comprehension. I am getting the values of these 3 fields alone. It doesn't matter whether my input file has 100 fields in different order. All I am interested is this one. In this case, we are not writing it back. Okay, so all what it does is, it simply shows the department ID, last name, and then first name. Okay, let's look at what is 101. It is J Henderson at abc.in. If you look at it, 101 is Henderson John, male, department 103, J Henderson at abc.in. So we simply filtered, not filtered, we simply projected our input file into a smaller output file, and the Dict reader helped because it can read each and every row as a key value pair, where the key being your field names. Okay, so the department ID, employee ID, and email ID are here. If you look at it, that's the actual header that was present in our input file. Okay, so this fields has to correspond to the actual header name, so that you can actually do this sort of filtering. Okay, so if you think of this one as a conversion script, right, a simple script that can convert, think of this again with, if you put a field name, field names, your input file name, your output file name, delimiter as parameters. The field names can be another file also, or in a configuration file. You can take a big CSV file, and then you can only select few fields. So in case if you guys are aware about database processing, this concept is called projection. So your individual row might contain 100 columns, 100 fields, but all you're interested in 4 or 5 fields. So you literally list whatever field names you want or column names you want in your SQL or any querying language. You will simply get those things alone. Okay. Again, this is a 10-15 line of code. So if you throw the Dict Writer also in it, so you would be able to create a smaller version of your file with only few fields in it. Again, this is a very live example, so you might have to put some exception handling, print statements and all those things. But this is another thing that you can use it right away. You can probably put that, add this code as exercise, and then you can create a tools folder and then put it over there so that you can use it on your project right away. So now the Dict Writer. So what we are going to do is, last time we just simply displayed. Here we are going to write. So we still have the field name. writer, what we are doing is we are simply writing. So there are two methods. One is write header and then the other one is write row. So when you say write header, since while doing the Dict Writer, we say these are the field names. So it automatically takes the field names and then writes it. And then every time you read a record using the Dict Reader, it reads from the dictionary in the order you have given in the fields list. And then it will write that into the file. So if you want to look at it, right? So, okay, I can quickly show you how this employee email looks like. So if you look here, so I have department ID, employee ID, email alone came in my file as a result, right? Okay, so here is what happens if you write a custom logic. Okay, so what happens is I have this field, a first name, which contains comma, right? So the name of this person who has an employee ID 3 is Rachel Maria Cooper. Okay, so there is a comma. Let's see what happens if we use the traditional file IO, right? So what we are going to do, like, we know that there are 7 fields: employee ID, last name, first name, gender, department ID, email ID, and end of record. We know for the fact that there will be 7 fields. So if you split a string by comma, and then if you count the number of elements in that list, you are supposed to get 7. So what we are doing is, so we have this file called CSV with Embedded Delimiter. So we create a dictionary, and then we open the file, right? And there are a couple of things you can do. Like, okay, I can do this data equal to, first I can split it by comma. So this is how you can take a string, split, and then create a list. And then I can use a len object, or I can simply say fields equal to number of comma plus 1. So that means, like, if we have 7 fields, you're supposed to have only 6 commas, right? And then I'm doing a stats on how many fields in each record. I'm just keeping a simple count. So if I look at it, I have 5 records that has 7 fields, and there is 1 record that has 8 fields because it has a embedded comma. So our typical split and join operation doesn't help here, right? So now the same example, we are using the Dict Reader and Dict Reader. So we just say my delimiter is comma, and then I am reading. I'm doing the same example. So here the split or the count. So this logic has been converted into this one, right? And then if you look at here, it exactly says I have 7 fields, all 6 rows. Okay, so that is the disadvantage of using your own custom logic. There is nothing wrong in it. Maybe it is not the right solution for processing delimited file, unless otherwise somebody gives you an ironclad assurance, hey, my data doesn't have the delimiter that we are using. You can go for your own custom logic, no need of using CSV module. Okay, so that is all about CSV. Any questions? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So if you don't have any questions, let me go into the second module, which will be again one of the very common configuration, right? So
Hi,
Sorry, for some reason my Teams automatically got signed up. So I think recording is still going on, I believe. So, okay. So,
Hi, MK.
yes,
Mine, could you just go through that last when you said that instead of having our own logic, we can go with CSV module, right?
right, yeah.
Could you please go through the piece of code that you have written using the CSV module?
Okay, sure. So you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. So here the example is just to count, right? So our own logic is this, right? The one that I'm highlighting, data equal to record dot split by comma. It creates a list for you, right? List of fields. Rather here what we are doing is, so we create a reader object and then passing the file handle to it. And then we say this is a delimiter. So the reader creates a list for you automatically by parsing this. Okay, so the only difference is you simply create reader equal to CSV reader, pass your file handle, and then pass what is the delimiter you are looking at so that the reader can parse it accordingly. So this is the only line. And after the reader is executed, if you iterate that in a for loop, so you are going to get a list every time, right? So this is the second thing. Here in this example, this is going to be a string every time. So you split it, and then later, let's say you are adding some additional fields to the data, or you are rearranging something. Then you will say something like this. Okay. So let's say I have data equal to let's say 10001 and then Subhash and then MK, something like this. So if I want to create a comma delimited record, what I need to do is I'm just going to say record equal to okay. So you might think this will work. This might work. So this would work. Let's say my data is this, right? So I have this. But if data has non-string elements, so let's see what will happen here. I just remove. I just make the employee ID as a string. So we have an error. Join expects every module to be, every field in the list to be data, right? A string. So then what we can do? So we can say map. You know what map stands for? Like map is a function that takes one function and one sequence and then apply that function to all the sequence. So what do we want to do? We want to convert every element into a string. So how do we do that? We call the string function and then we pass the data. So now there you go. So we have a couple of hurdles in reading and writing. Okay, first for reading, you need to use the split explicitly. That's not a problem. So that is the way we split data, right? That's what we have done. But the problem is, if the comma is part of your data, then it is the split function, split method is going to split it by that comma anyway. So you will end up in getting more. And then while doing the join, you have to ensure that the list contains string values, even though your actual value is a number, just for the sake of making the join method works, because join expect the list or any sequence that to have string data type for each and every element. So you can overcome that by using the map function that specifically does the same thing. It converts every record, every element into a string, and then you join it, you get it, right? So this is the custom processing, split for reading, join for writing, as long as your embedded data doesn't have that particular thing, right? Here in this, we open the file. So this is going to be the same in both cases. First thing that we do is we call the reader, csv.reader, pass the file handle, pass the delimiter, so that we let CSV take care of parsing. When I say parsing, you read a record, which is a string, convert that into fields by looking into what delimiter has been provided, and then take care of embedded fields. So embedded commas will come especially when the data field will be double quoted, and then there will be comma inside. And then as soon as you read it, you use the reader to iterate, and then you will get one list that contains each fields at any given point of time. Right? If you want to do a write, so you create a writer object and then pass the list into the writer method, and then pass the file handle, it automatically writes. Right? So you simply outsource the parsing of a string into a field, a list, or a sequence, or taking a sequence and then creating a string in order to be written into a file using the reader and writer method respectively, or the dict reader or dict writer, which is great if you want to do a like a, what do you say, like projection, right? So you want your input file is big and your output file is smaller, or the other way around also. Your input file is small, you have calculated some derived fields, and then if you want to create a bigger file, so that is another thing that we can use as well. That helps, Girija?
Yes, MK. Yeah,
Okay.
that's helpful. Yeah, thanks for explaining.
Okay. Our next candidate is JSON. Okay. So JSON is fun, right? Oh, not that one. So we have it already here, but anyway, like I have some data if I want to show. Let me show. So what JSON is? So JSON is another file format. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Okay, so which is a format of JavaScript data type, or like JavaScript object. In our case, a typical very simple JSON represents a list, a dictionary in Python. Okay, it is similar, but it is not exactly the same. Okay, because JSON can get pretty complicated. It's a lightweight data interchange format. So there are typically certain format that will be published. So there will be schemas, there will be some convention. So even though the JSON is slightly complicated than the CSV, but it does have some format and some specification. So that means it is much more robust compared to a CSV. Okay. So what we lose in terms of readability, in the sense like looking the record into one line, here in JSON it might span multiple lines. What we gain is a format or a standardization, right? So it is still easy for humans to read and write, and then it is also easy for machine to parse, because you will see why it is. The other equivalent format, data interchange format, that is very famous and still widely used out there is called XML, right? XML is a bit verbose because you will have an open tag, you have a close tag, and all those things. So if you have a JSON and if you have an XML with the same data, chances are that your XML file will be slightly bigger than your JSON. Okay. So, but still, there are legacy applications that will still use XML for configuration. Most of the Java application, for example, but the JSON format is gaining. not gaining, it has already had a wide acceptance. So it is one of the best suited format on a web application or a client server application, because JSON is something that can JavaScript can natively read. So that means you can pass a JSON from your server to your client, and then the browser side scripts can render that JSON data into a displayable format in HTML. Okay. And there is also another thing is like when you have so most of you know what an API is, right? A REST API. So typically you have some web URL which we call it as an endpoint, and then we can pass some query string, and then you will get some data back. So most of the time the query string that goes to the server as a request along with the request and then comes back as a response would be a JSON string, so which you need to be able to parse. And also, if you are someone who branched into databases that is not SQL based, which is the RDBMS, databases like DocumentDB from AWS, MongoDB, and there are other DynamoDB is another thing. So JSON probably is the way you will create data to be inserted, or you will read from the database. Okay, so JSON is very significant. The knowledge about understanding the JSON format and then how to process it will come in handy. Another usage of a JSON file is creating a configuration file. So you can create one config file per environment where you can give the database name, some common file prefix, and all those things as a data. So in case if you decide that I want to move to a different server, so instead of an in-house database server, I'm converting that into a cloud. Or okay, so I'm just going to rename the location where the data files will be stored. You don't have to go and touch the code. All you need to do is update the config file. Your code can run without any issues. Okay. So the JSON module is again a built-in module, which is to read JSON and convert into Python data structure, and which is to convert the Python data structure into a JSON format so that you can create JSON file, right? So when a JSON file is read, it is converted into a Python data structure. When the Python data structure is returned using the JSON module, it will be converted as a JSON string. So process of encoding from JSON to a data structure is called serialization. The other way is called deserialization. So each JSON type, so JSON itself has a lot of data types, has a Python data type as well. So encoding and decoding to encoding may not produce exact. So it is not back compatible. Okay. So for example, you have a tuple, it will convert that into JSON array. Okay, but the JSON array will get converted into list only, right? So those are some of the minor things that you might want to remember, which doesn't affect the integrity of the data anyway. It's just that list and tuple are two data types which is equivalent to the JavaScript JSON array. Right? The only difference is a tuple is immutable, right? So in JSON module, we have load, dump, loads, and dumps. Okay, so you can read it as load s, dump, and dump s. Means load will read a JSON file and then create a Python data structure. Dump will take a data structure and then write it into a JSON file. The load s and dump s is the same thing, but instead of writing or reading into files, it will create strings for you. Okay, and then here is the JSON versus Python data type. So JSON, what we call as an object, in Python we call it as a dictionary. What we call as an array, we call it as list or tuple. So that's the reason you have one to many mapping, the reverse, when it goes back, it all either an int or a tuple always get converted into an array, and then array will always get converted into a list. So that is where I was putting a minor point to remember. String is called str. Numbers, JSON has int, long, and float. In Python 3, there is no long data type. Int covers the same thing. You can have a very large number that can be accommodated into the int. So another thing like array and list, a large integer in JSON might get converted into an int. A long might get converted into a int, or int also might get converted into an int. Float, again float. True, false, and null are the constants. The true and false are all in lowercase, but in Python, it is true, capital T, false, capital F, and null is none in Python. JSON doesn't support serializing a set. So, so if you have a data structure that is a set, you might want to convert that into tuple or a list before you write that into a JSON file. Okay, so now here is an example, right? So if I have the CSV file, I need to know where the header is and all those things, right? But if you look at it, this looks like a nice, standalone piece of data with key value pairs like a dictionary. So I can very well understand what this is. So it has an employee ID, last name, and then it has a contact, which is again a dictionary that contains mobile number and the email ID. And then it says is active, just assuming whether the employee is an active employee or a resigned employee or whatever it is, right? And then there is a project which has some fictitious customer name. So which is a list again, right? So it is a data structure. So even though outwards it has a brace, it looks like a dictionary. So it's not a dictionary in the sense like, so it contains embedded lists and embedded dictionary and different data types. So we can call this as a data structure rather than a complex data type. Okay, so here is an example. I have a Python data structure. So it's a list. I have some individual values. So I have number, integer, float, Boolean, string, and a none type, right? So that is there. And then after that, I have tuple, and then I have a list, and then finally I have a dictionary. Okay, so this is one thing. So this is one of the input data, and then I have a text, a string that contains a JSON-like format. Okay, so now let's use the dumps and load method. It is very simple. You simply call JSON dumps and then put the data structure name. You say JSON loads data structure name, right? So here, if you look at it, so this is the Python data structure that got converted into a JSON type. And similarly here, I have the string. So if I take this, take this one and go to, there is a site called JSON lint. So if I put it over here and then say validate JSON, so it is a valid JSON, right? So it is there on a it is there as a string, triple quoted string. Okay, so that I can have embedded double quote. So it creates this one, right? So when you do a dumps, right, by default it creates something like this. But if you just say indent equal to 4, or indent equal to whatever number you want, it creates a format like this. See, by default, the JSON was this originally, but using the indent method, so you would be able to create an output JSON with all this indentation, which is something like this. Otherwise, it will simply write it as one record with all the commas and everything, fields, everything is squished, very long record. So this will come in handy. So if you want to create a JSON as a string and then send it as a query string to your web API call or something like that. Okay, but what we are interested in is looking at the load and dump method, which is basically, so what I have is, so I have a fictitious config file. Okay, so let me show you this. So it is something like the Tamil Nadu State Education Department's, some configuration file to process. So I have state code and state name and some contacts, which is again very nested. So email is there. In the phone, I have a default phone and mobile phone and everything. So this is all very common to Tamil Nadu Education Department. And then I have a DB information. So the host name, user ID and password. Password sharing is putting that in a config file is a bad idea, but think of this as an encrypted password, right? And data directory prefix. So I have data, edu and tn, which is common. And then I have two more candidates. So one for SSLC, which is our 10th grade exam. So for that, I tell my DB schema where my data is going to be is SSLC, and the data path, additional data path is, so within data edu tn, I will have a folder called 2019-2020 SSLC. And then these are the subjects we are handling. So I have a list, right? And then HSC, higher secondary course or higher secondary certificate, which is the 12th, right? So different states have different things, but this is what we call 10th and 12th exams in Tamil Nadu. Okay. So here the DB schema is different. And then the data path is, so instead of SSLC, we have HSC. So what we are going to do is we are going to use the load s and then the dump s, load and dump method, and then create a config file for SSLC alone. So that means we just simply take out the HSC and then we reformat it a little bit. So open the file. Creating a JSON, creating a Python data structure from a JSON is that easy, right? You simply say json.load and then give the open file handle. So the load automatically reads the entire file and it converts that into appropriate data structure. It also does some parsing. It might fail if you have invalid JSON. So I use a dictionary configuration. I create a new data structure called SSLC config. I'm reading from this config. So what I'm doing is, other than the key SSLC and HSC, read everything, right? So here I read state code, state name, contacts, DB info, state prefix, but I drop these things first, right? And then I say, I get the data path. So I take the data prefix and then add the data path of the SSLC. And then I store it as a top level. And then I'm deleting the data path prefix. If you remember, our original config file has data path prefix because, so the original data path will be different for SSLC and HSC. So we simply append the data path into this prefix and then create a new data path key. And then we delete it and we move this one upwards because it is only dealing with only one exam type, right? Similarly, we will take the database schema and then put it at top level. And so if you want, you can also, So I'm just adding my test code is SSLC. Okay, so it is something we are adding to it, and then the subjects we again adding. Once we have the new configuration for data structure created, I open a file, I do a dump, config the data structure, first parameter, file handle, second parameter. This is optional. So you can try out without indent and then with indent 2, with indent 4 and see what happens, right? So I have my original file, which is this, right? I have SSLC, HSC, if you remember. So these two things are going to be there. So this is the Python data structure, right? And then modified contact is there. Data path itself contains this one. DB schema has DB info has DB schema added. State code has been added. Test code has been added. So this has come at one level top. Okay, so let me show you the modified data. Right. So this is the original. This is the original data that you saw, right, where you have SSLC information. So this is the prod configuration for SSLC. Okay, so I have state code. These things are there, common. And the DB info, we added schema, so it has a top level data. And then the data path itself is created a big one, right, with SSLC and everything. It's absolute path for storing SSLC files. And then this is something that we have added. And then the subjects formatted a little bit differently. Okay, so this is how. So this is an example where you can read and write from a file and then process JSON or write back to JSON. Okay, and all these files are there in the location, so you would be able to easily understand, right? So now I have some more information, like if I do without indent and all those things, so you can take a look at it if you want, right? So it's an unformatted, no indent. So this is what it produced. Okay, so if I take this and then if I put it in JSON lint, right? So it is all in one line. So if I JSON lint, one of the things it does is it validates and then it converts, it does some indentation. Okay, so if you look at it, so this is the usage of indent and unindent. So this one will be easy to store. It will take less space, but whereas this format is readable easily. Okay. So now a real world example. So what we are going to do is, so there is this student registration layout. Okay, not CSV. So there is a JSON layout. Okay, so I have a list that contains one dictionary about each field of a file. So I have student ID, starting position, how many bytes, what is the field number, and then what data type it belongs. So that like I can process a file dynamically. Any type of file, I can create a script and then pass configuration file and the file name so that I can read these files accordingly. Okay, this is for a fixed format file. So I have 7 different fields. Now the thing with the file formats is like, it changes, right? Sometimes they say, hey, I want this field to be 20 bytes instead of 15 bytes, or they want to add some fields in the middle or in the end. So if you want to create a JSON based on the modified layout, okay, how we can do? So this is one of the real usage scenarios. Okay, so what I can do is, since I have every field has a standard type of field, like attributes like field name, starting position, length, field number, data type, I can first convert this into a CSV file, make those changes, and then have functionality to convert the CSV back into JSON. So this will work fine. You can make changes quickly, and then you can put it back, right? So you can create configuration file, especially when your requirement changes, position changes, and stuff like that, right? So this is my input file. So what we are doing is, let me close these things. Okay. So we will programmatically convert that into a CSV file, right? So we have length, field name, data type, field number, start, everything. So that is the file JSON that we saw now. Okay. And what we are going to do is we are going to make some changes in the CSV. The change data is here. What I did was I just added an additional field, 8th field called school name, which is 20 byte long, starts at position 82, and then the field name is called school name, right? So this is something. Then we used programmatically read the CSV file and then convert that into a new JSON. So where this additional field is added. Okay. So this is something that we do in our project. A lot of times we do it manually, right? So this is a way. This is one of the sub case study, if you will, right? It's a simple script, but I also, going to give you some pointers where you can take the script and then add some more functionality so that you can get a hands-on CSV and JSON in one script. Okay. So we have this data, and what I'm doing is, again, so this is a script which is embedded here, so that you can have it as a HTML. You can simply copy this and then create a script and run it on your own. Okay. So I have this is how you call, right? Python file format converter.py. So you can give a CSV file name or JSON file name. So what this one does is, if you give a CSV file, it will convert that into a JSON. If you give a JSON file, it will convert that into a CSV automatically. It is very simple. So we have some 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 methods created. So let's go from the bottom. So this is our main script. So if our under name underscore name underscore is main, so that means, so here is how script starts. So we do a print. First we get the file name, and then we get the file extension, and then we do the convert. So these are the 3 methods we call, and then we end this. Okay. So first we go to the get file name. What this one does is, if length of sys.argv not equal to 2. So first parameter in the first element in the sys.argv is a script name. Second parameter is something that we need. So it should have 2 parameters. If not, file name not passed as argument. Usage Python, comma, this one, right? So then, okay, so here we need to say something like this: file name CSV or JSON file, right? And then I call this exit method from sys with return code 1. Then we get the file name, and then we are checking os.path is file. Okay, so I have a method called os. In that there is another os.path is file. It will give you true whether whatever input you provided is a file. So in that case, we simply display what is the file name, and then we will return the file name. Otherwise, we will say file name passed doesn't exist. Please rerun with CSV or JSON file as a parameter. So we have this one, this method, this user defined function that takes care of passing the sys.argv, checking whether it is a valid data is passed, valid file name is passed, and then it returns the file name to the user, to the caller, right? So that's the first script. First thing that happened, and then we do check file extension. So what this one does, if file name ends with CSV or file name ends with JSON, it's okay. The thing is, I didn't put any error handling, so here you can put an error handling as well, right? So else you can say file is supposed to be CSV. Here also you can put an exit. That's ideal. So that's first thing that you can make change, and then convert the file. So we pass the file name. Here we say if file name ends with CSV, we call this CSV to JSON. If file name ends with JSON, we call the JSON to CSV, passing the file name. So in the JSON to CSV, we open the file. It's a JSON. So we use a load method to read the file and then create a header, create the data structure, and then we will get the key field name to get the list of, we get a set that contains the keys, right? So what we need is, in order to create the CSV, I need this attributes from the JSON. Okay, so that's what we are doing. We just want to make sure that we get all the applicable attributes. So that's the reason we go through each and every field and create a set, so that I will get a unique list of all these field names from the JSON: length, the starting position, field name, data type, and field number, right? So that's something that we are doing. And then output file, we are replacing CSV with JSON. So we are not getting the output file name as a separate parameter. That's another thing that you can do. So if third parameter is passed as another file name, you can use that. Otherwise, you can create a output file name based on your input file. And then we open the output file, we call the writer, and then we write the header. And then from here, I simply use the header to look at the data, and then a CSV file is created. So this JSON, if it goes as an input, it goes this as an output. So first thing I told you is check for the extension and error out, right? So that's one thing you can do. The second thing is you can pass the JSON on both JSON and CSV file names, so that you don't have to create an output file name on your own. You can control it as a parameter. The third thing is, so when the JSON got converted into a CSV, there is one problem though. Every time you run, this fields are going to be in different order. So you might see field name, starting position, length, data type, field number, or whatever it is. So ideally, I might want first the field number, and then the starting position, and then the length, and then the field name, and then the data type, right? So what I used is a reader and writer. Sorry, the writer, right? So go for a Dict Reader, and then probably pass the list of fields that you might see in the JSON as a parameter. If the parameter is passed, then you take the header from the parameter, split it by comma. Otherwise, you construct it. So that means you can control the order in which your CSV fields are created. So that is another modification that you can do. So now JSON to CSV, it creates, right? So what I did was I ran Python file format converter, then I pass the JSON, right? And then it is starting conversion, file name is there, valid file extension is okay, converting file, input file name is this, output file name is this, 7 fields found in JSON, 8 fields returned, including header, and then ending. So you have a decent logging display statements. So this JSON was converted into this CSV. So now what I did was I have also displayed it so that it is a standalone. So here what I am doing is I am taking the CSV, I made a copy and I added one more field, right? So that is this one, right? I added the school code, and then I am running the same thing with the CSV file as an input. It will create JSON. So here everything is same. So instead of JSON to CSV, it will call the CSV to JSON. So my list is this layout, counter, I have kept it. So I open the file, CSV file, and then I use the reader object and then I take the header out, right? And my output file is, again, we're converting the CSV to JSON. So here also we can use the same thing that like I told. So we read each and every record as a list, and then we create a list of dictionaries. Okay, so if you remember, there is a zip function which takes two sequences and then you can convert that into a dictionary. So what it does is it takes this header record, header fields, and then it reads each and every record and then create a dictionary on your own, and it appends, and then use a JSON dump. It creates an output file, which is this one, right, with one additional fields added. So read from JSON using load, and then using the writer from CSV, we converted this JSON into CSV. Reading from that CSV reader, and then using the JSON dump, we converted the CSV into JSON. Okay, so here, this is a very basic format. It simply takes it and converts it, and then we saw some of those changes that you can do automatically. And then another thing I want you to try is, let's say you have these fields. Okay, so here the name is mandatory. The data type is mandatory, or maybe it is not mandatory. The field number and field name and length. So these are the three mandatory things. Okay, so maybe you have modified this somewhere in the middle. You said, okay, I'm just going to add in the fourth record, I'm just going to add a record, or maybe like I'm just going to add. So when you read the CSV, you have to populate the starting position yourself, so that you take the length of each field and then you can create it. And the second thing is the field number. It may be in different order, but this field number is there, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, this one. So you read the CSV, sort that CSV records that was converted as a dictionary by the field number, and then you recalculate the starting position. Either you do a recalculation or you validate whether the starting position has been coded successfully or not, and then you convert. So there is one method you can add to validate the CSV so that the field numbers are in order, and then the starting position is calculated accordingly, right? So this is something that you can do. Again, that something gives you a full visibility of both these modules, and also a thorough something like, if in your project, if you handle with files, so you want to create a configuration format for each and every file automatically. So maybe this is something like a Excel or something like that. Your BAs will create a layout for you. So if you want to play around with this, you can do that. And now if you ask how we can sort a dictionary like this JSON using the field name. If you go here, so I have an example, right? So how to sort a list of dictionaries, right? I have scores, rank, something. So what we are going to do is we use the sorted function, and then we pass the key, which will give you a value. So instead of sorting a regular way, we are going to tell the sorted function what is to sort. So I'm just telling sorted based on the rank field. Okay. Now, when I convert that, so if you look at it, rank 1, 2, 3, and 3. So since we are sorted only by rank, it automatically took the second field in some order. So putting this thing along with the logic, adding a couple of additional methods will transform this script, which is already a good tool of JSON to CSV and CSV to JSON converter. It took only like 2 hours for me to create. This I created it on Saturday. Okay. Okay, so adding a few methods makes this not only as a converter, it also makes it as a JSON validator. So you can validate in both ways, and in that way, so this is a very generic tool that you can use it in your project, or you can share it with others, putting some documentation, of course, and then parameter processing and additional validation that we talked about. I talked about 5 or 6 different things that you could do, which is something and useful utility, right? I know, like, we already passed the our threshold. I still might need like 10-15 minutes from your end. So in case if you need to leave, please go ahead. Like I said, it is being recorded, so you can look at it. And before I quickly show you Sqlite3 thing, because that is needed for tomorrow's comparison, right? I want to finish this off first and then go for the full case study tomorrow. Do you have any questions on the JSON module?
Okay, this is Maruti. Hello.
Yeah, Maruti.
I think if at all, if you have any nested JSON, this method will not work, right? Do you have any other methods?
No. This will not work. So this is a tool specifically for flat JSON with like a list that contains a dictionary of fields, right? So
yes. So one-to-one correspondence should be there.
We can actually create that sort of thing where, like, if you have the JSON field name, put it in proper CSV format, probably that might need much more configuration file to translate nested JSON into like probably like one JSON record into one JSON object into multiple records, or you read a multiple CSV record and then create one, something like that you can do. But this is for a flat.
This one is for flat. One-to-one should be there.
One-to-one should be there. As a matter of fact, it has to be a list of dictionaries.
Yes.
The typical data structure. Yeah. Thanks for. Yeah.
Just I think we did that for Java. We did it actually. We actually for our project need. So I just wanted to check if any inbuilt functions are there in Python. So in case of nested JSON.
There is no like inbuilt this thing. It's you still have to write the logic. There is a transformation rules needs to be there. So if I have a dictionary of list that contain another set of dictionary and something like that, like how do we convert? Because in those cases, mostly like your one-to-one may not be there. Like one like element in a JSON will be one record in a CSV, right? So you can either read a part of JSON and then convert it into multiple records, where some record will have common fields and then some will have different values, right? For example, like let's say you have one JSON for a student score, right? So we have some detailed information. So you will have one file, but when we read that and convert that into a CSV, you might have 5 records for the student, like one for English, one for Tamil, one for math, and so on.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that also, because I just told that it is a very generic one. It is not a generic one. This works better in the JSON format that I have given, right? If that's what you have, then you can.
I think we need to write our own logic. So
yes. There are tools available, but like if you want to have a granular,
we have online tools to convert from JSON to CSV, but I did not see it from CSV to JSON. That's why we did some logic in Java. And
but the problem with the online converter is the data goes into the their server, right? So if you have sensitive data, then probably we may not be able to do that. So something that we can do it ourselves, or those online converters, if they have offline mode, we can use it, right? Like, because like that's something that we might want to do it quickly. But again, this one, it's a tool by itself, right? So with some more additional features, error checking, and then parameterization and documentation. If I add another 100 lines of code and then probably another 50 lines of documentation, this is going to be a good example, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so the third thing is going to be really quick. Okay. The third module is called Sqlite3, so which deals with databases. Okay. So what is Sqlite? Okay, first we'll talk about the Sqlite, what it is, and then the Sqlite module. So Sqlite is a RDBMS. Okay. It's a very simple RDBMS. It's a file-based application. You don't need a separate server. You don't need to bring up a server. You don't need to set up a lot of things. All you need is, if you don't have it already, download the sqlite3.exe file, which is typically available online on the Sqlite3 site, and put it in a path, or put it in a place, and then add the folder to the environment variable path, and then you have a database available for you, right? This Sqlite3, even though it looks very simple, it is very robust. Maybe it may not handle billions of data. It can still handle a sizable amount of data. Right? It is PostgreSQL compliant, right? So it is not very strict on type checking, but it will do for most of the cases where you can compensate not having your own database server or something, or internally if you want to process something using the querying capability rather than writing your own logic, right? It is very it's a choice of using it as a embedded database in a lot of mobile and web application. As a matter of fact, chances of your browser using the SQLite to store some of the cached information is very high, right? It's best for local storage if you want querying capabilities, right? Sqlite3 module, it supports DB operations on a SQLite database. So typically any database operation, if you write a script, there are a couple of steps which is very standard, right? First thing is you have to connect to the database server, right? That's one thing that you do. Then you will get a connection object. And then based on that connection object, you can prepare SQL, and then you can execute. And then once you execute, you will get a cursor object. You can loop it through and then get the result. So typically the database read operation happens that way. Connect, prepare, execute, iterate, and then finally close the cursor or close the connection, right? So this is the standard database operation steps that most of you might be aware by now. Connect, prepare, execute, iterate, close. So that's what Sqlite gives you also. So if you really want to take it to the next level, so there are MySQL, which is open source, PostgreSQL, which is open source, and there is Oracle DB2. So those are very high level, high standard DBMS with data running in their own server, or you have server running on your local machine. But the thing is, the concept is pretty much simple. So you have not done database operation and then you want to do DB, you can start with Sqlite3. So I have a demo here. So I have import OS, and then import random module and Sqlite3. Again, the default go-to for data generation. So I have a DB name. I set up a test.db in the same location where I have this thing. And since I'm going to run this every time, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say hey, if the database is there, just remove it. So database file name will be .db. I create a faker module, and then we call the connection object. Okay, so connection string can be complicated, especially for Oracle or MySQL, where you have to give the host name, port name, user ID, password, retry flag, and all those. The cursor timeout, how many seconds I can wait until the connection is there and all. But in Sqlite, it is very simple. You call the Sqlite3 connect method and pass the database name, which is a file, right? You simply pass it, you get a connection object, right? Once you have it, using the connection object, I am just calling the execute. So which is a SQL. So in case if you're not aware of, SQL is another language where you can create or like do operations on database. I'm creating a table called employee ID as an integer, which is primary, last name, first name, email ID, and department ID. Okay, this is exactly the same thing that we used on CSV file, right? Demo. I'm creating it. So when it, so here is a caution, right? So when it comes to writing a robust application, you don't hard code your SQL, right? You hard code still, but there is a part that goes as dynamic, right? So typically a string has to be passed, but if you want to pass something as dynamic, like using a variable name, value of the variable, you shouldn't be concatenating the strings. There is a way called preparing SQL statement. You might want to read about how do you prepare SQL statement, especially when you are putting that in a script or any program, right? My employee prefix is 1. I have a data, which is a list, and then I have created it. Now I'm going to insert data. So what I'm doing, same thing, right? Employee ID, last name, first name, email ID, and we are creating. And then we call the connection execute again. So this is what I was talking about preparing. So if you look at it, this is my SQL. I am going to insert into the employee table. These are the fields, and then the values, I'm just putting question mark. Okay, so I could have simply said value plus, or like I could have joined these things, right? So I take this and then join using a comma and then created a string. Okay, so instead of this, you will be tempted to use something like this, right? Dynamic equal to, right? So what you can do is comma dot join map str comma, and then you can pass this, right? And then static equal to, can have this, then and then I simply say okay, so this is still dynamically creating, right? So this is something that I have seen people using it. Okay, but the problem is, so if you create your query like this, every time you execute, even though the query looks similar number of fields and similar number of number of fields, but the value might be different. Every time the database engine has to optimize the query. Okay, but when you code like this, right? So this is called a template, and then you are passing a value. So especially when it comes to select statements, this query will be optimized and then it will be cached so that there will be a slight performance boost. So this is called preparing the query. You will see it especially when you have question marks. Okay, so we are inserting data. We inserted around 20 rows into the database. And another thing is you have to commit, right? So if you don't commit, then the data won't be stored permanently. Okay, so even though this is not a database course, so if you already worked on databases, you know about transactions and then commits and rollbacks. So we are making the data permanent, and then we are getting the data from the database. So I am just using department ID 1005. I'm going to do a query, and again here I have a query string where if you look at it, the department ID equal to question mark, right? So I have my query string, and then I have the dynamic part, static part and dynamic part, but still it is not concatenated. So here I am creating a cursor, and then from the cursor I am executing the query. So query, static part, and then we are passing the department ID. So here is the thing I was talking about. So you will pass the second parameter to the execute as a list of values. So look at the trailing comma. We talked about single value tuple to have a trailing comma. Otherwise, it will end up in having, you can create it as a list. So then we use the, so this will be a cursor of data type of cursor. We simply use a for loop and then we can print it. Okay, so what happens is, so it will print all the employees from the department 1005. And then there is a second example. So we select department ID and then we do a count, and then we do a group by, and then we do an order by. So this is called aggregate function. So the databases typically have 5 aggregate functions: count, sum, min, max, and average, AVG, I guess, or mean. I think they have only AVG. So then it executes the query. Now you can get the summary. So this is what we will be using on our case study. So each department, so you have how many number of employees. So if you look at it, so probably you might have how many we created. We created 200 records. So this might end up in 200 different, the counts will be 200. So then we do a close connection, right? So again, this is something you might want to do. So whenever you're doing insert, update, delete operation, the order of sequence should be: you connect, you prepare, you create the data, or you do the modification, and then you call the insert or update or delete SQL statement, you commit, and then you close. Whenever you do a select statement, which is to retrieve the data, connect, prepare, create a cursor object, and then using the cursor object, you do an execute, you iterate to get the values, and then finally you close the connection. Okay. So